can tell I'm not from here. I sound like an American, don't I? But I'm not really much from America either. I was born and grew up in India, and this is where I got my American accent. How, you may ask, do I get an American accent in India? Well, it's because I went to an American school, a missionary school up in the Himalaya mountains, in just straight north of Delhi, in a place called Mussoorie, Uttar Pradesh. And if any of you go to India, that's the best part of India. Right on the mountains, looking out, up to the mountains, I should say, up to the high Himalayas over into Tibet. Now, that's the part of India that Islam is, the majority of Muslims live. So I was born and I grew up with Muslims all around me. India is the third largest Muslim country on earth. I don't know if many of you knew that before. But the vast majority of Muslims do not come from the Middle East. The vast majority of Muslims come from Asia. If you take all the Arab-speaking Muslims in the world, they only make up 15% of all Muslims. How many of you knew that before tonight? Very few of you. Most of our books, most of our, certainly our, many of the things that we study in school, in fact, I would say most of our Bible study to the Muslim world has been geared for the Arab-speaking world, hasn't it? And almost all of our missionaries go to the Arab-speaking world. Yet the vast majority of Muslims are over in Asia. Just take a look at the 4 largest Muslim countries on earth. Indonesia would be the largest, anywhere from 190 million to 200 million Muslims. Pakistan would be number 2, from 170 to 180 million Muslims. India comes number 3, 160 million Muslims. Bangladesh is number 4, about 120 to 130 million Muslims. If you just take those last 3 countries that I just mentioned, Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh, they all used to be one country before you, well, actually, you were the one that created that country. They were just city-states before the British came and made them into a country. And then in 1947, they got their, 47 for some, but 47, they got their independence, became 3 separate countries. Just take their Muslim populations of those 3 countries, and you have 500 million Muslims. 500 million Muslims. The entire Arab-speaking world is only 270 million. So you can see much of our ideas of Islam and everything that we have been geared towards as far as missions is concerned has been geared towards the wrong people. Because if you want to know where Islam is today and where Islam is growing the fastest and where we're having the most problems, don't look to the Arab-speaking world. You better look towards the Indian subcontinent. Now, you being British know that very well because much of our problems are coming out of the Indian subcontinent. Because 70% of the Muslims in this country come from the Indian subcontinent. Maybe they're not all here in Bournemouth, but they're certainly in London, where I have been for the last 20 years. And for 20 years, we've been engaging with probably the most radical Muslims on earth. And I feel the most exciting Muslims on earth. It's fascinating to live in London. We came in 1992. We came to London to help you out with your radical Muslims. I went to the embassy there in New York, and I was supposed to try to get a missionary passport to come here to Britain, which normally takes anywhere from 18 months. Some people have taken up to 3 years to get a visa. I went in there and he said, "Why should we allow you to come to Britain as a missionary?" And I said, "Because you need me." I said, "You've got a growing radical Muslim problem and you have no one to deal with it. I have 2 master's degrees, one of them in Islamic apologetics and the other one in apologetics. You have nobody that can understand what they're saying or what they're doing or even how to answer them. You need me to come and help you out." He says, "Do you have about 45 minutes? And I got my visa in 45 minutes. Because he saw the need to deal with radical Muslims. Because you don't have anybody here in Britain that's dealing with radical Muslims. The Anjum Chowdhuries, the Sheikh Umar Bakri Muhammads. These are the guys I deal with. And I have to confront them all the time. And every Sunday, tomorrow as well, we're up there at Speaker's Corner in Hyde Park. If you're ever free on a Sunday afternoon, drive on up and come and see us. See what we do every Sunday. And I have a team. And we go down there, and there are hundreds of Muslims. In the summertime, there could be thousands of Muslims down there. And we get up on a ladder, and we take them on. I hold these 2 books up, the Bible in one hand, the Qur'an in the other hand. I always make sure my Bible's bigger than my Qur'an, so you know which is the bigger, the better. And we look at these 2 books, and we compare them. And we do a comparison between these 2 books. And this one wins every time. We do that purposely. We confront them. Because Speaker's Corner is the only place on earth we can do this. I can't do this in America. I could not do this in India. In America, we have too many guns. I'd be shot to pieces. But here in Britain, and specifically in London, we can ask these kinds of questions, and we're doing that. And for 20 years now, we've been training people how to do that, how to engage with Islam. Now, let me define terms. How many people know what Islam means? Okay, at the very back, what does it mean? Submission. Good man. How many of you people in this room believe that Islam means peace? Why not? That's what you've been told. Don't Muslims tell you that all the time? Islam means peace. In Arabic, the word peace is salam. Salam is a first form verb. If you've studied Arabic, there are 10 verbal forms. Salam is a first form verb. Islam starts with an aleph, so that means it's a fourth form verb. It is completely different than a first form verb. Salam means peace. No one doubts that. It's like shalom in Hebrew. But Islam has always meant submission, has always meant obedience. It has never meant peace. And if you have any doubt, just read this book and you will see why Islam is not a religion of peace. How many people have had a chance to read the Qur'an? Parts of it. Not all of it, but even parts of it. Okay, what's been your impression when you've read it? Violent, okay. Okay, what's your impression? Can't really understand it. What are some other impressions? Jumble all over the place. Go ahead. Death to the infidels. Yeah, that's true. Go ahead. Okay, that's interesting. Historical. Can you name one? Do you know of any off the top of your head?
I think it says something about Joseph when he was in prison in Egypt, something about crucifixion, which...
That's right. The baker that was in Joseph goes and gets crucified. Joseph lives. That's a very good one. I'm glad you pointed that one out. Because Joseph lived in 1800 BC. Crucifixions were created by the Lydians in the about the 7th or 8th century BC. So how can you have crucifixions that early? Good one. That's a good one. Not many people know that one. That's true. And that is the problem with this book. If you have a chance to read this book, I'm not going to ask you to read it in Arabic. Just read it in English. See if you can find any complete stories in this book. There is only one complete story in the entire Quran. And that's the problem with the Quran. It's nothing like this book. Don't ever get the two confused. You won't have any problems as soon as you open its pages. It'll put you right to sleep. And I tell that to my Muslim friends every Sunday. The problem is, it's not meant to be read to be understood. It is meant to be read to be memorized. You memorize the Quran. You memorize it from the first surah all the way up to 114, the 114th surah. And you memorize it for one reason and one reason alone, to get barakah. Barakah means to get blessings. That means every Muslim knows that in order to be saved, there is no assurance of salvation in Islam. In order to be saved, you have to work off your salvation. And you work off your salvation by doing barakah, 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 barakah. That means to do blessings. You do all these works to create a barakah that is recorded by an angel that sits on your right shoulder. Now, every one of you, when you were born, according to Islam, you were given two angels, two recording angels, one to sit on your right shoulder and one to sit on your left shoulder. And the recording angel that sits on this shoulder records your good deeds. The recording angel that sits on this shoulder records your bad deeds. Both of you, all of you have two angels. Don't worry, they're invisible. You can't see them, but they're there. And you work off your salvation by creating these good deeds to work off your bad deeds. It's like credits and debits, much like your balance account in your bank account. That's what Islam is based on. And if you stop and ask yourself, are all man-made religions, do they not all use the same paradigm? Every man-made religion is based on credits and debits, is it not? All your animistic religions, Hinduism, all of your great religions made by man is all based on good deeds worth a basis of good deeds versus bad deeds. Working your salvation, so hopefully you can get into heaven. You have only a hope of getting into heaven. You don't have an assurance. That's why they're reading the Quran. That's why they're reading in a language they don't even understand. I have a friend in London who has memorized the entire Quran. I play the Mickey on him every once in a while. I ask him to say, tell me right now, what is Surah 2, Ayah 145? And he stops and thinks and gets word for word exactly right. And I say, now what have you just said? He has no idea what he said. He spent his whole time reading that book, but memorizing that book without any understanding what it says, because they're not to there. I mean, it's not there to be understood. They don't treat the Quran like we treat the Bible. Now, we read the Bible to understand it, don't we? And I hope your pastors actually open its pages on the Sunday morning. Do they not? Please say yes. And when they open the pages, they read it, right? And you can understand what's being read, right? And the pastor takes what's being read and applies it to your situation today. That's what we demand of all of our pastors and of all of our leaders. Why? Because the Bible can be understood. And that's why we love the Bible. It can be understood in every language, not just in Hebrew or Greek. We have it translated now into 2,500 languages. Why? Because we know everybody can come to God's Word and understand it. Unlike this book here. See, this book cannot be translated. In fact, what they've said here, this is a Qur'an that's both in Arabic and in English. This is the Qur'an. The Arabic part is the Qur'an. I need the Arabic there. So, because I open its pages all the time, and even tomorrow, when I'm down at Speaker's Corner, I'll be using this. I'll probably be the only one at Speaker's Corner with a Qur'an. Muslims do not like to bring the Qur'an to Speaker's Corner. What would they bring it for? They may have memorized it, but they don't understand a word of it. So what's the purpose of having a Qur'an around? They have no idea what they've memorized. And that's why I use this to destroy Islam. It's this book that destroys Islam. And I'll show you exactly how you can do the same thing tonight. I'll show you how you can actually use the Qur'an to your advantage. But when they open it up, and I ask him to do this, and he actually tries to think through what's there, I say, now tell me what you've just said. He has no idea what he's just said. And I usually have to be the first one to tell him what he's just said. And then he looks at it, and he's shocked to find out that these verses are in the Qur'an. Verse after verse after verse. One of you said it's full of violence. Absolutely. There's 149 violent verses in this book. Yet have you ever heard a Muslim that admit that this is a book of violence? They never admit it's a book of violence. Mainly because they've not read it. We have read it. I've been reading it for 30 years. I've been working with Muslims for 30 years. I have read this book many times through. All the way through, when you read it, you will see not only is it a book of violence, it tells you how you're to treat your wife, how to treat your kids, how to walk, talk, eat, drink, sleep. Every area of life supposedly is dictated, yet it doesn't ever really give you much at all to hang on to. And that's why when you read it, because it is so disjointed, because stories don't begin, stories don't end, one story does not fit from the other, there's all kinds of contradictions. Case in point, look at the story of Moses in here. In fact, there are 10 stories of Moses in here. 10 different stories of Moses. Not one of the 10 stories agree. And that's the problem with the Quran. It's ulta pulta, as we say in India, all over the place. Which suggests to me that it's been borrowed from many different sources. And that's exactly what we're finding. Now we're going to get back to that, and I'll come back to that. But let's get back to Islam itself as a religion. So the largest number of Muslims are there in Asia. And yet it's the Asians that we're finding that are causing most of the problems. Now you might say, hold on a minute, what's happening with the Arab Spring? That's true. Have you noticed the Arab Spring is all over our news, and we're getting enormous amount of news of what's happening in Syria, what's happening there in Egypt. How much of that is theological? Any of it? Or is it all political? Almost the entire uprising is based on politics, is it not? Yes, there is some aggression against the Coptic Church, and that's true, and they are the scapegoats by the Muslim Brotherhood. The Copts have always been the scapegoats of the Egyptians. Whenever they want an uprising, whenever they want a popular unrest, they always blame the Copts, and the Copts have had to deal with that for 1,400 years. They've had to deal with this religion called Islam. And that's nothing new, and it's going to continue, and you're going to see many Copts leave Egypt if it keeps going the way it is. Nonetheless, how much of what's happening in the Middle East is based on theology? Do you ever hear any theological terms? Do you even hear any theological discussion? Do they ever talk about God? Or do they ever confront anybody else theologically? Do they confront Christians theologically? No. Do you hear any debate about the divinity of Jesus Christ in the Arab world? Or about the Trinity in the Arab world? Or about the authority of our Scripture in the Arab world? Not at all. Where are all those debates happening? They're all happening in India and in Pakistan. If you have any doubt, go up on YouTube and just look at the over 43,000 videos on YouTube. Over 43,000 videos on YouTube that are attacking Christianity. All of them are Muslim. They're all in English, not in Arabic. They're all in English. And they're all coming out of the Indian subcontinent. Now, when you look at those attacks, you see, we have to deal with them, and so we have to work with them, and I have to engage with these people because I debate them. That's what I do. I'm a debater. And I go all over the world and I debate. I've done over 80 debates with Muslim scholars. Though I'm headquartered here in London, I go all over. I was just last week in Ethiopia. And I debate Muslims theologically. Because to understand Islam, you've got to understand that Islam is more than just a religion. It's an entire way of life. It's an entire, well, you might say it's a 24/7 religion. Everything a Muslim does is his religion or her religion. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Everything they do, how they walk, talk, eat, drink, sleep, everything, every category is dictated not just by this book, because this book is so ulta-pulta, as we said. It is so out there. There's hardly anything you can handle on it. 20% of this book, even the Muslim scholars don't understand. And the 80% that you can understand really doesn't take you anywhere, so you have to go to other genre of literature. And the other genre of literature that Muslims go to are known as the Sunnah of the Prophet. That means the traditions, the Islamic traditions. And those are based on what the Prophet did. So a Muslim, in order to know what they're to do anywhere in the world at any time, in any place, they have to follow what the Prophet did, the Prophet Muhammad. They have to follow what he said, his sayings, the hadith, what he did, his biography, the sirah, and of course the commentaries on this book called the tafsir, and the histories that lead up to him, the tahriq. Those are the four genres of what we know as the Islamic traditions, the Sunnah of the Prophet. The sirah, the hadith, the tafsir, and the tahriq. And those are the four things that they all look at. And when they look at that material, that tells them how they're to walk, talk, eat, drink, sleep. And that's why Muslims, you will see, they'll wear sometimes, many, especially the radical Muslims, have you noticed they wear short trousers? Trousers that are too high? Like there's a flood on all the time? Why do they do that? Because the Prophet Muhammad wore short trousers. Why do they grow a beard? They all have to grow beards. It's been in the news the last week. Those two young boys from that Catholic school, Derby, that refused to cut their beard. Why is it they refused to cut their beard? Because the Prophet Muhammad had a beard, and he said any religious man has to have a beard the length of one hand. I'm not quite there yet, but I used to have a beard way down to here. Boy, it gave me an awful lot of notoriety. I don't see anybody here that's religious. Why? Because the Prophet had that length of beard. Every Muslim male, not a female of course, must have a beard that long. Then also the Prophet wore a headdress, a topi, and that's why many of them are wearing topis now. And have you noticed many of them will take these little branches and they'll brush their teeth with these little sticks? Why? Because the Prophet Muhammad brushed his teeth with a stick. Long before toothbrushes were invented. That's how they brushed their teeth. So all these categories that the Prophet did, they're to do. And that's why Muslims all over the world pretty much do the same thing, say the same thing, live the same way, and want the same volition. That's why it's important that we understand how you define Islam. And the reason why is because you're hearing in your press and you're hearing in your government that Islam is basically a religion of peace. Are you hearing that? You're hearing that the Prophet Muhammad is a man of peace. Are you hearing that? You're hearing that the Qur'an is a book of peace. Are you hearing that? I'm hearing it all the time. And that's because your government and certainly your press and your pundits would like Islam to be that. But they're saying the same thing about Christianity, are they not? That Christianity is not a religion that has any specific claims. It's nothing more than a social organization started by a man named Jesus, who was a social reformer, but he never did any miracles, right? Isn't that what they're saying? And there's not just one way to salvation. We all share the same God, and there are many ways to get to that God. And so Christianity is one way, Judaism is another way, and Hinduism is another way, and all isms basically get you to God. And that's what your government wants, and that's what many of your pundits want. They want us all to be speaking from the same page. And that page must be based on Western, traditional, humanistic values. And that's why they're very clear that they want to make sure that Islam, which is the troublesome religion, because it's the one that's causing all the problems, not only through violence, but also through all the demands they make, like these two boys with the beards, and the girls with the hijabs, or the jilbabs, or the niqabs, or the purdas, or the chadors, whatever name you want to give it. Every young girl wants to wear that. That's why you're having so many problems with halal food in the schools, and certainly in your prisons. Even in Tesco, in many of your supermarkets, it's halal meat now. My local KFC, good old American KFC, only serves halal meat now. So does my Subway, only halal meat. In fact, we're surrounded by halal meat shops, and I have to sit there and I have to pray over it every time I buy it, and I have to tell the people, I want to bring it back to God. I'm bringing it back to my God. And I do that purposely, just to show that I refuse to acquiesce to their impositions, because they are imposing, because Islam is a religion of imposition. If you have any doubt, just look at its history. Look and see how it started. And when you look and see how Islam started, you need to go back to the historical text. But don't go back to the text that's taught in your schools. Those are sanitized texts. You need to go back to those who actually wrote the original history. You need to go back to the people who actually are the earliest transcribers of how Islam began. How many of you here know what I'm talking about? Do any of you know what I'm talking about? How did Islam begin? Go ahead at the very back. Okay, what's your name? Alan, well, I like you because you seem to know quite a bit. So I'm going to use you as my foil. Why don't you come down and sit right at the front so we can go back and forth. This is my scholar for tonight, okay? Alan, you're going to be Abdul tonight, okay? Your name is now Abdul, okay? Abdul, so you believe that, but I want you to put on your Muslim cap now. Pretend that you're a Muslim, okay? It's quite easy to do because you've got a beard already, so you're already there. Now, Abdul, you believe that Allah is God, and you believe that your prophet Muhammad received a revelation in a cave from an angel named Gabriel that came from Allah, right? And you believe all that, but where does that story come from? It's in Al-Bukhari. No, it's not in the Qur'an. Don't look here. You're not going to find it there. That story's in Al-Bukhari, which is a tradition, right? When was that tradition written? When did Al-Bukhari live? When did he die? Shall I help you out here? You're struggling a little bit. Let me help you. Try 870. And when did your prophet die? 632. How many years between the time your prophet died and when it was finally written down? 40 years. You see a problem? The first we hear about Muhammad, in fact, from your prophet, when's the first we have anything written down about your prophet Muhammad from Muslim sources? No, not much before the Ottoman. 691, thank you, very good. 691. When did Muhammad die? 632. How many years between 691 and 632? 60 years. How many of you knew this before tonight? There's nothing written about Muhammad anywhere until Abdul Malik writes it down on the Dome of the Rock and on coins. The Dome of the Rock is that beautiful building in Jerusalem. You've seen pictures of it. On the inner ambulatories, the inscriptions on those inner ambulatories is the first reference we have to Muhammad in any Muslim sources. You didn't know that before tonight, did you? Now, some of you were saying, hold on, what about the Quran? The Quran is full of references to Muhammad. That's true. But how many times is Muhammad referred to in this book? 4 times. You will only find his name in the Arabic 4 times. You will find his name in the English translations hundreds of times. But this book goes over and over and over and says about the prophet, who lives in the settlement of the prophet. But it never says who this prophet is, never gives him a name, except 4 verses that refer to him by name. But when was this book written? Abdul, you should know the answer to this one. The 3rd caliph. Good for you. I like this guy. You know your material. The 3rd caliph, his name is Uthman, and around 650. You even know that part. Good man. So he burned all the other manuscripts and he wrote this book, right? That's what your caliph did, Uthman. When did he do that? 650. Muhammad died in 632, about 20 years after, roughly 18, 20 years after, he did that. Is that true? Can you find a manuscript from the time of Uthman? That's right, you should say no. No manuscript exists at all from the time of Uthman. There's no manuscript from after Uthman. In fact, we can't find any manuscript at all for your Quran in the 7th century. Yet you claim, and every Muslim I meet claims that this book is eternal. This book is complete. This book has no history. This book has never changed. Are you hearing this from Muslims? Every Muslim I talk to refers to this fact, that this book is complete. Unlike our Bible does not have any original manuscripts, and we make no apology for that. We know our Bible, our New Testament. Of course, the Old Testament, 3,400 years ago, there would be no manuscript for 3,400 years ago. So we wouldn't expect them to last that long. But certainly the New Testament, 2,000 years ago, we wouldn't expect any of the New Testament manuscripts to be written because they were written on papyrus. Papyrus disintegrates within 100 years. That's why you need copies of copies of copies of copies. I don't know why I'm asking you. I should be talking to you. Copies of copies of copies of copies. But we have all kinds of copies, don't we, of manuscript evidence? In fact, we've got not only do we have the ones from the 2nd century, we have a good 12 manuscript parchments or fragments from the 2nd century. We have 68 from the 3rd century. We have another 44 from the 4th century. That's 124 fragments of the New Testament already we have by the 4th century. And then come to London, I'll show you the Sinaiticus. The entire New Testament. You people own it. You stole it. Put it in that building so we can look at it. And that's why it's in the British Library today. And that's from the mid-4th century. That's 300 years before the Qur'an. We can reproduce the entire New Testament. Right next to the Sinaiticus is the Alexandrinus. There's the Alexandrinus, the entire Old and New Testament from the 5th century. That's 200 years before the Qur'an. So why can't you Muslims come up with one Qur'an by the 7th century? And see, by that time, you people owned that part of the world, did you not? You had destroyed Basra, Baghdad, Damascus, Jerusalem, and Cairo by 642. That's within 10 years of Prophet Muhammad's death. You now own the 5 greatest cities of the Levant. Those people could read and write, could they not? There were great libraries there in Alexandria.
We're told that as the Prophet recited the Qur'an, there were secretaries who wrote it down.
Secretaries, did you hear? From his lips to your ears.
Animal skins.
Bones, bark. By Uthman. So it was written down. So you're telling me it was written down. So where's that manuscript? But where are those manuscripts? In fact, you were given 4 manuscripts by Uthman, were they not? Now, you Muslims have told me that those manuscripts do exist. In fact, I'm going to show you them right now, because I've heard this for 30 years, that these manuscripts do exist. I'm going to show them to you right now. See if you recognize this. By the way, I've never met this man. We have met, actually, haven't we? Yeah, you've been to Speaker's Corner, but you know what I'm going to talk about. But we've never talked about this tonight, so you're a stooge. In fact, you're an unwilling stooge, but it's all right. I like unwilling stooges. Stooge in a good sense. This is the one you always claim is your original right there. Isn't that not right? Just say yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Be obedient, be submissive. That's called the Topkapi manuscript. You've heard of this one, right? Shame on you. Be a good Muslim and say, yes, you've heard this one. This is the one that you Muslims claim is your original. Do you all see this? We'll pass it back so you can watch it. This is called the Topkapi manuscript. This is the manuscript that every Muslim, for the last 30 years that I've been working with Islam, this is the original, written by Uthman. In fact, if you look carefully, you can see Uthman's bloodstains on it. See right there? He was killed while he was reading this, and that's his bloodstains on it. Okay, and that you claim is the original manuscript. You can hold that one. You claim there's another one that is just as important, and it's this one right here. This is called the Samarkand manuscript. Now that one is housed in the Topkapi Museum, in the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul, in Turkey. That's where it is today, okay? So that's where it has resided, and of course it goes right back 1400 years to the time of Uthman to 650. That's the original. This is the other original, because 5 copies were made, right? Actually, 4 copies were made. One was left in Medina, one was sent to Baghdad, one was sent to Basra, and one was sent to Damascus. Here's the other one, and this is called the Samarkand. This is in Tashkent in Uzbekistan. The Samarkand. Do they look the same? They don't, do they? You can see already there's a difference between them. Nonetheless, these are the ones that you have claimed for 30 years that I've known you Muslims. This is the ones that we've always had to stand against. And there's nothing we could really do about it. There's not much we could say about it. There's not much we could really confront it with, because we don't have access to those manuscripts. No one can touch those manuscripts. Can you imagine Christians making the same claim about the Bible, that we have Bibles that go right back to Jesus Christ, John, we have the original for John, or Matthew, or Luke, or Mark, and that we would show manuscripts on YouTube, but we wouldn't let anybody touch them or look at them to try to delineate whether or not we are telling the truth or not? Can you imagine Christians doing that? We would never do that, would we? Every one of our manuscripts is open to scrutiny. Every one of our manuscripts has had, not only the major manuscripts, have had hundreds of doctorates written on them. The Sinaiticus, it has been, every page has been gone through. They've used accelerated mass spectrography on it. They've done all kinds of testing, forensic testing on it. Certainly they have looked at the age of it. They know when the ink was written. They know how deep the ink is. They even know what the angle of the stylus that was using it. In every category, there's been research after research. So nobody doubts today it is mid-4th century. No one would even begin to doubt that. And you can go and look at it, can you not? In fact, you can get it up online. These manuscripts, no one is permitted to touch. I would love to be able to do accelerated mass spectrography, AMS, on that, because that would give us a date within 15 years, either side. We're not permitted to. We have to go on their word that these are mid-7th century, that these are Uthmanic manuscripts. That was until 2002. In 2002, 2 scholars were finally given access to those 2 manuscripts. These were Turkish scholars. They owned the manuscripts. They were the only ones that had access to it. They were the only ones that could have access to it. One was Dr. Tahir Altıkılıç, and the other one was Dr. Esenoglu. Now, both of these scholars are considered to be the world authority on both the Topkapi and the Samarkand, not only because they have access to it, but they spent 5 years studying these 2 manuscripts. 5 years looking at them, not only looking at the ink, looking at the parchment that they were written on, the vellum that they're written, the animals, they're written on animal skins, looking and seeing how much of the manuscript they included. In fact, how much of the Quran was included on these manuscripts. And they came out with their findings in 2007. We were only given those findings in May of this year. Just a few months ago. Just a few months ago, I finally was sent. In fact, here is the paper. Here is a photocopy of their book. This was sent to me by some scholars in Canada. It's called Al-Musaf al-Sharif. Al-Musaf al-Sharif. That means, the Musaf means the manuscript, Al-Sharif, the great manuscripts. These are the great manuscripts. Now, this is 1,000 pages long. I only have the introduction here. It's only 83 pages. That's all you need to read is the first 83 pages. It's all in English. We got it in May of this year. I decided to debate this issue with the leading debater in Britain today, Adnan Rashid, and the 2 of us debated on June 22nd on whether or not the Bible or the Quran is the Word of God. He let me go first. That was his mistake. You should never let me go first. Because all I did was hold up these 2 manuscripts plus these 4. These are the other 4 that they claim to be Uthmanic. This is the Sana manuscript. This is in Yemen. The Sana manuscript that was just discovered in 1975. You can hold that one. This is what they call the Ma'il manuscript, which is here in London. This is at the British Library. The 2165 manuscript. That one is in a completely different script. Can you tell that this is different than everything you've looked at so far? That's in a Hijazi script, a much older script. This is the Paris Perpetinian manuscript, which is in Paris, owned by François Droche, considered to be the world leading scholar on Quranic manuscripts. And then the Husseini manuscript, this one here, which is in Cairo, in Egypt. Those are the 6 leading manuscripts that Muslims claim all come from Uthman. Dr. Tahir Altıkılıç looked at all 6 of them. Now remember, Dr. Tahir Altıkılıç is the only one that has been given access to these manuscripts. He is a Turk, he is a Muslim, he is the leading scholar in the Islamic world on Quranic manuscripts. And here are his findings on the back. I can just pass these around. But every one of these, he is now saying, every one of these are from the 8th century. Not one of them is from the 7th century. Not one of the earliest manuscripts is from the time of Uthman. In fact, he dates all of them to 60 to 100 years later. What's more, not one of these manuscripts agree. They're not all the same. And not one of them is complete. Not one of them is complete. Ooh, I love it. Makes my job a lot easier. What he is saying is, every one of these manuscripts were started by a man named Abd al-Malik. Abd al-Malik was the caliph, the king, the Muslim king from 685 to 705. Muhammad died in 632. So he was during the Umayyad period. And he was the king from 685 to 705. He was known as the great Arab reformer, and he was the one that built the Dome of the Rock, that beautiful building in Jerusalem. He built it there basically as a rejection of Christianity. The reason we know that now is because we're now reading the inscriptions on the inner ambulatory, and the inscriptions on the inner ambulatory are all against Jesus Christ. They're against his divinity. They're against the Trinity. Say not 3, God is 1, and God has no son. God has no son. That's from Surah 4, Ayah 171. It's all against us. Is it true that you and your mother are to be worshipped as God? That is Surah 5, Ayah 116. Yes, these are Quranic verses. But what's interesting, they're the earliest Quranic verses we can find. And when was the Dome of the Rock built? In 691. 691 is when it all began. 691 was when it all began with Abdul Malik. We can't find anything earlier than 691 for Muhammad. Nothing from Muslim sources. We can't find any reference to any people called Muslims earlier than 692. We can't find any religion called Islam earlier than 692. And we have no Quranic references until 697 to 705. We can't find any reference to a city called Mecca until 741. Ooh, Did you hear what I'm saying? No reference to a city called Mecca until 741. Now stop and think what I'm saying here. Can you see what this means? What do we know about Mecca? Mecca is where Adam and Eve were thrown down to when they were thrown out of the Garden of Eden. See, in the Quran, the Garden of Eden is in space. It's not on earth like our Garden of Eden is. In Surah 7, Ayah 24, it's very clear that the Garden of Eden is in space, and when Allah throws him out of the Garden of Eden, he throws him down to earth. Now, according to the traditions, where he threw him down to was Mecca. So that would mean Mecca would be the earliest place in the history of mankind. It'd be the earliest settlement, would it not? That's where the first human beings ever existed. So it's the oldest city on earth, right? According to the Quran, it's where Abraham went to rebuild the Kaaba with Ishmael. And Abraham, we know, lived in 1900 BC. That means that certainly Mecca was there in 1900 BC, right? We also know that according to all the Islamic traditions, Mecca was a center of trade, north, south, east, and west. All the trade went through Mecca. That's why it became such a great city. That's why it became so important. Now, everything I'm telling you right here is from Muslim sources. That Adam and Eve were thrown out of the Quran, well, that's in the Quran as well. Out of the Garden of Eden down to earth. The traditions, the hadith say that happened in Mecca where they were thrown to. That Abraham is right there in Surah 21, that Abraham was there. He goes into the Kaaba there in Mecca. What Abraham is doing in Mecca, I have no idea. But nonetheless, there he is in Surah 21, ayah 51 to 71. He goes into the Kaaba and he destroys all the idols with a big idol. The next morning when the people wake up, they see all this destroyed idol. They go to Abraham and says, "What have you done?" He says, "Don't ask me, talk to the idol." Well, they can't talk to the idol, so they throw him into a fiery pit. A great story. I wish I had that story in Sunday school, but it's not in my Bible for a very good reason. Because we know where that story comes from. That story comes from the second Mishnah of Rabbah, a apocryphal account, a Jewish apocryphal account written in the 2nd century, taken out of a Jewish apocryphal account and slapped into the Quran. Nonetheless, can you see, if Abraham is there in Mecca, that means Mecca existed in 1900 BC. If it's a center of trade, it should be on some map, right? Traders should have talked about it. Take a look at every map, every trade route map, up until the 8th century, and see if you can find the name of Mecca. You won't find it anywhere. Dr. Patricia Corona, considered people one of the probably the most prestigious scholars we have in the world today. Dr. Patricia Corona is from Denmark. She did her doctorate at School of Oriental and African Studies here in London under Dr. John Wansborough. She was head of department when I got to know her at Oxford University. Wrote a book called Hagerism, and then wrote a book on Meccan trade and the rise of Islam in 1987. Because she wrote that book, she got death threats from Muslims, so she moved to Cambridge University, was head of department at Cambridge University. She is now head of department at Princeton University, considered to be probably the most astute scholar on early Islamic history. She reads and writes 15 languages, archaic languages. How many of you in this room can read and write 15 archaic languages? You're talking about an amazing woman. She is the one that has probably destroyed more of the historicity of Islam than any one other person I know. And she was the one that actually asked this question about Mecca. She wrote an entire book about it in 1987. And she looked at every inscription she could find, and she went to all the trading documents. Now, remember, she reads and writes the original languages, so she could go back to all the original documents, read them all from the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, all the way up to the 7th century, and couldn't find any reference to any place called Mecca and any of the trading documents. Yet this was supposed to be the center of trade. She went to documents in Taif, and also writings that were written in Yathrib, which is now today known as Medina, and she saw that there was in the early 7th century from Ctesiphon, which is now Baghdad, that there were these Persians from the Sassanid area that came down to the deserts of Arabia, came down to Yathrib, which is just northeast of Mecca. They found silver there, so they set up silver mines, and they would travel down to Taif, down to Najran, down to Sana, up to Khaybar, back and forth up along the trade route. This is the trade route on the Western Plateau. No reference in any of their writings to a place called Mecca. Not at all. Yet that was supposed to be the center of trade. We can't find any reference to Mecca until 741. She finally found it written on one document called the Continuato, Byzantium, in 741. Methodius. That's almost 100 years. In fact, that's over 100 years after Muhammad's death. So what are you going to do, Abdul, with Mecca? I'm putting him on the hot seat for a good reason. Oh, I won't say that. He did exist. But what do the non-Muslim sources tell about him? See, in order to understand who Muhammad was, you need to go to those sources outside of Islam. Because certainly Muhammad did exist, and he's written about. We have, in fact, one of the earliest references to Muhammad is right here in Britain, in the British Museum. It's called the Doctrina Iacobi, written in 634. And it mentions him by name. But it says nothing about him being a prophet. No reference to him having a book called the Qur'an. No reference to him being a Muslim. And certainly no religion called Islam. Not at all. He's nothing more than an Arab raider. Never refers to himself as a Muslim. In fact, all the references we can find, the writings of Sabaeus, the Chronicles of Sabaeus in 660, that also refers to Muhammad by name. But no reference to him being a prophet, or that he had a book, or that he was a Muslim. In fact, it's interesting because these Arabs were destroying cities. They did destroy Basra, Baghdad, Damascus, Jerusalem, and Cairo by 642. They did go right across North Africa and destroyed the church in North Africa, and going the other direction all the way to India in the east, to Spain in the west. That whole area of land came under the control by the end of the 7th century. That's not in doubt. And now we're going back and looking at all those destructions and all the conquests. And we're looking and asking, what did the people call them? And what did these people who were destroying the church and destroying the Persians and the Sassanid Empire and the Zoroastrians, what did they call themselves? No reference to people called Muslims. They call themselves Saracens. They call themselves Maghrebites because they were from the Maghreb. They call themselves Ishmaelites because they were in the line of Ishmael. They call themselves Hagarenes because Hagar was the mother of Ishmael. And they call themselves Muhajiruns. Muhajiruns mean people of the Exodus, nomadic. They were all on the move. These are the 5 names they call themselves. No name of Muslim is in that list. That name is not introduced until Abdul Malik introduces it in 691. Ooh, I love it. Now, everything I've just told you in the last 15 minutes, you can read in one book. And it's written by one of yours, one of your scholars. Actually, he's an historian. His name is Tom Holland. How many of you know that name? Dr. Tom Holland. Why is it you know everything? Oh, okay. Dr. Tom Holland has written a book, and you all need to buy it. It came out last year, in 2012. In March of 2012. Dr. Tom Holland is one of your best historians. Did you not know this? He's on television all the time. He's written 3 bestsellers. He wrote Rubicon, The Fall of the Roman Empire. He wrote Millennium, The Fall of the Byzantine Empire. And he also wrote Persian Fire, The Fall of the Persian Empire. Now stop and ask yourself, the Persian, the Byzantine, the Roman Empire all fell when? In the 7th century. What came next? That's right. Basically, is you guys, you Muslims. Isn't it great being a Muslim for a while? You are the guys that destroyed them. You came next. So who is best equipped to write the next chapter? Dr. Tom Holland. Dr. Tom Holland came out with a book last year called In the Shadow of the Sword. Go and get it. You can get it on Amazon.co.uk. It's 400 pages long. It is already a bestseller. It is already outselling every other book in the Muslim section here in Britain. In fact, it is number 1 in its paperback. The hardback is number 2. Guess what's number 3? The Qur'an. Both the paperback and the hardback are outselling the Qur'an. That shows you how popular it is. And you can be sure no Muslim is buying it. These are all non-Muslims that are buying it. People like you. You need to go and do it. Because what he has done, he has gone around the world and he's taken all the best material from Dr. Patricia Corona, who has done the material on Mecca. Dr. Patricia Corona, who has also done material on the Qibla. He's gone to people like Dr. Hotting, who is My professor, when I studied under him at School of Oriental and African Studies in the 1990s, probably the world's best authority on putting it all together. He's gone to Dr. Andrew Rippin in Calgary, who is head of department there in the University of Calgary. He's gone also to Dr. John Wansborough. Of course, he's dead, but he took all his material, and he's the one that's looked at the literary content of the Quran. Was head of department at School of Oriental and African Studies, where both Patricia Corona and Dr. Michael Cook studied. He's gone to the best scholars, and he has taken their material, and then he's put it into a book that you can understand for the laity. He's put it into a story form so that all of you can understand it. And that's why he's done us all a great favor. But he's the first one that has actually had the courage to say that Islam is absolutely fraudulent. There is no religion that comes from a man named Muhammad. There is no Quran that comes from this man named Muhammad. He doesn't even know about this material that I'm introducing tonight. This has just come to us in May of this year. Dr. Tom Holland has yet to hear about this. In fact, he didn't even touch the Quran. He stayed away from the Quran. But can you see what I've just said in the last half hour? Basically, everything, and I'm just giving you a quick skeleton of what we now know. Basically, we can pretty well say that Muhammad had nothing to do with the Quran. And if Muhammad had nothing to do with the Quran, then who is Muhammad? Who exactly is he? And what is Islam? Is he where? Chapter 5, verse 16. And what's the word in Hebrew there? Mahmad. Is Mahmad the same as Ahmad? Is it really? You want to read? You want to open Song of Solomon 5:16? For he is glorious himself, O son of Jerusalem. Muhammad in Jerusalem? Read it and see if that is Muhammad. And if you're going to say that's Muhammad, you're going to take a Hebrew word that is an adjectival phrase, Mahmad, and impose Ahmad onto it, which is a proper noun. Can you do that in Hebrew? And if you do want to do it in Hebrew, go ahead and read it out loud. Chapter 5, verse 16.
His mouth is sweetness itself. He is altogether lovely. This is my lover. This is my friend, O daughters of Jerusalem.
Is Muhammad ever in Jerusalem? Altogether lovely in Hebrew is Mahmad. The lovely one is Ahmad, which is a diminutive of Muhammad in Arabic. Can you take that and impose a proper noun onto an adjectival phrase in Hebrew? No. In fact, if the author had wanted to put a proper noun there, there is a proper noun in Hebrew, and it's called hemdan. He could have put hemdan in there instead. Why didn't he do that? But if you're going to do it there, Abdul, there are 11 other places in the Old Testament where you find the word Mahmad. I want you to go to every one of those 11 places, take Mahmad out and put Ahmad instead, and see what happens. In 1 Kings, chapter 11, it mentions that this man goes into the house, and everything that is lovely, he takes out and carries it on his shoulder. If you want to put Ahmad there, he goes into the house and carries Muhammad out on his shoulder. You got to be consistent. Do you see how stupid it sounds? You don't do that to our Bible. So tell me now, where is he found in the Old and New Testament? Because you've got to find him not only in the books of Moses, because that's in Surah 7, ayah 157 says that, but in Surah 61, ayah 6 says you also got to find him in our New Testament, in the Injil, in the Gospels. So tell me, where is he found in the Gospels? John 14, the Parakletos. I'm helping him all of this. He would get to it sooner or later. Go to John 14 and read what John 14 says about the Parakletos. You all know who the Parakletos is, the Comforter. Jesus says, I'm leaving you, but I'm leaving the Comforter, the Parakletos, P-A-R-A-K-L-E-T-O-S. Now, see, fortunately, in Greek, whenever you write the Greek, you have the vowels in there, don't you? See, he's being a Muslim, thinks it's every language is like Arabic, where there's no vowels, there's only consonants. So he wants to take those vowels out and put in other vowels. He wants to replace with Parakletos, which means the glorious one, which is like Ahmad, the glorious one. So he wants to think that that is Ahmad, that is Muhammad, right? Chapter 14. Verse 16.
I will ask the Father, and he will give you another Parakletos, counselor.
Another Muhammad, okay.
He will be with you forever.
Forever. Is Muhammad with us forever? Okay, read on.
The Spirit of truth.
The Spirit of truth. Isn't that what this is referring to? So it already gives it the answer in verse 16. Is Muhammad a spirit? Strike two. Go on, read on.
The world cannot accept him.
The world never accepted Muhammad? Of course it did. Strike three. Go ahead.
Because Because it neither sees him.
Did anybody see Muhammad? They did see Muhammad. Otherwise, they wouldn't know who he was. Strike 4. Go ahead.
Nor knows him.
Did anybody know Muhammad? Of course they knew him. Strike 5. Go ahead.
For you know him, for he lives with you and will.
Does Muhammad live with us? Strike 6. Keep on.
And he will be in you.
Inside me? God forbid. Gives me the heebie-jeebies to think about it. Can you see the problem with that? If you're going to say that's Muhammad, read the rest of the verse and look at the context. Don't do that to our Bible. Thank God we know who the Parakletos is. The Parakletos came and Christ promised him, and 50 days later he came at Pentecost. And he is here. We don't see him. We don't know him. But he's in every one of us. Say yes, please say yes, except for him. In about half an hour, we'll convert him back, okay? But can you see why it's important that we do have these answers for everything? But can you see what I've done in the last half hour? Basically, if you're going to be talking to Muslims, the problem with Muslims today is you've got to define who they are. Now, you will hear many kinds of Muslims, just like you'll hear that there are many kinds of Christians, are there not? But how do you define yourself as a Christian? What makes you a Christian vis-a-vis any other ones that are up there on television that are claiming to be Christians? What's the first thing you ask anybody to know whether they're a Christian or not? Are you born again? And where do you get that from? The Bible. So therefore you are Bible-believing Christians, are you not? You look at the Bible as your authority. And you look at Jesus Christ as your model. So a true Christian is someone who follows the Bible and models himself on the person of Jesus Christ, right? And unless they unless they act like Jesus and follow what the Bible says, you're not going to call them Christians, are you? And that's why we can pretty well dismiss most of those who claim to be Christians on BBC and ITV. And these people who are claiming to represent us, but they claim very quickly that Jesus never did any miracles, never said he was God, and that all gods are the same. You can pretty well dispel them, right? Because of the Bible says so. If that's the definition we give for Christians, we've got to use the same definition for Muslims. You've got to be consistent. So a true Muslim is someone who follows the Qur'an and models himself on the Prophet Muhammad. And that's why it's very easy to delineate and to basically to define what Islam is and who is a true Muslim. Because they follow the same paradigm we follow. They have a book, we've got a book. They've got a model for that book, Muhammad. We've got a model for our book, Jesus Christ. Who's got the better book? We do. Who's got the better model? We do. On every category, we win. That's why it's so good, because for us to get involved in this dialogue, in this debate. Why? Because we're the only ones that understand Muslims better than anybody else. Your government doesn't know what to do with Muslims because it doesn't even know who a Muslim is. They have no idea what motivates Muslims. They think that Muslims want the same things we want. No, they don't. They don't even know who God is. We do not share the same God. Please don't confuse that. If we share the same God, and anybody tells you that we share the same God, ask them one simple question. Can your God, Abdul, the God of Islam, can he enter time and space? Can he come to earth? No, he can't. And if your God cannot come to earth, your God's too small. Get a bigger God. Come on home. We've got him. His name is Jesus. My God can come to earth anytime he wants. And he did so at the very beginning. That was God who was walking and talking in the cool of the day there in the Garden of Eden. That was God in Genesis chapter 3, verse 8 and 9. My God was able to walk with legs, was able to talk with a mouth. That means he had to have a stomach. He had to have a pair of lungs. My God took on human form anytime he wanted to. That's a pretty big God. And if you say I'm limiting God by making him human, I will say you're limiting God by saying he can't become a human. Don't ever limit God. Use it to your advantage. I love it when Muslims ask that question. Because that means we can really, really run with it. Because what we're saying is God can do anything he wants. He can come and take on any form he wants. And he's not even limited to take on human form. He was a burning bush with Moses. He was also a pillar of cloud during the day and a pillar of fire during the night, leading the Israelites through the desert. That's the kind of God we have. He can take on any form, proving how omnipotent he is. And Muslims want to destroy that by saying he can't even come to earth. What kind of God can't come to earth? Then he's not a God I want to follow. And he's certainly not the God I see in my Bible. Because my Bible, where is my Bible? Oh, you've got my Bible. You stole it again. My Bible is full of references of him come to earth. We call them theophanies or Christophanies. Comes to earth over and over and over again. And the God I see and hear is a personal God. The God I see and hear is the God that comes to my level. The God I see and hear that comes down to where I am, where he lives amongst me, and yes, speaks my language. That's why I can read his word in every language. The God I see here is a holy God, but is a God who wants a relationship with us. What a God we've got. And I don't see that God at all in this book. Not at all. So be careful when Muslims try to impose their standard on us. More than that, when Muslims make claims and try to define who they are, and there's a real battle going on within Islam, especially post 9/11. Since 9/11, Muslims don't know what to do with their own religion. Because the vast majority of Muslims living in this country would like to be peace-loving people. They have come to Britain mainly for jobs and education. Many of them have come because of the freedoms that they see here. They love this place. They don't like your weather necessarily, but they certainly do like living here. They see that it's much nicer to live here. Well, why is it so nice to live here? Where do you think those freedoms came from? How is it you gained those freedoms here? Because of this book. It's because of the Bible. And the beautiful, not only the laws, let me be careful, let's don't use the word laws. Not the laws and rules that we see here, the principles we see here that have been applied all through Europe, and that's why the whole European mindset is based on Judeo-Christian principles. Those principles are riddled through this Bible. But those principles you will not find in this book. And that's why these two books are so much at odds with each other. And that's why when the Muslims come here, they want what we have. But they want to call it Islam. Can they call it Islam? And what you will hear, many of your neighbors, and when you talk to them, you'll hear them say things like this. Yes, we believe in democracy. Can Muslims say that they believe in democracy? Can you find democracy in this book? Do you find democracy in the life of the Prophet Muhammad? Absolutely not. Islam is absolutely dependent on a theocracy. And the theocracy right through Islam in every one of the four schools is based on Allah at the top. Underneath comes the Khalif. The Khalif is the king who is responsible for everything. He is chosen from the religious scholars known as the ulama. Underneath the ulama comes the ummah, which would be the believers. Under the ummah comes the kitab, which is us, the people of the book. And under the al-kitab come the kafirs, which are the unbelievers, non-believers, the idolaters. Very much a hierarchical theocracy. And Islam is absolutely dependent on that theocracy. And that's why in order to maintain that theocracy, they need rules, laws, and regulations called Sharia. Sharia is what creates the theocracy, maintains it, and continues it. And also, it's Sharia that they would like to bring to this country. Even the most moderate Muslims, and not the liberals, but certainly the moderate and the radicals, they all want Sharia. They believe that they have to bring Sharia here. Because it's not man-made laws, it is God, divine, holy, writ laws, instituted in heaven. There you go. You can't practice it without Sharia. That's why you want to bring it. You have to have Sharia. And you find that Sharia in this book? Get rid of democracy and impose theocracy. But you will use democracy to get in power, will you not? As Musri did, and the Muslim Brotherhood did, and as the Algerians did, and certainly as you're finding in many, and certainly they did, the Al-Sistani did in Baghdad, in Iraq. Democracy will be employed to get into power, but once you're in power, then you introduce the theocracy. And that's why in almost every one of these cases, the governments had to come in and eradicate and throw out the theocracy that's there. Now, you can see, for us as Christians, how are we going to maintain and how are we going to control, or how are we even going to get into these kind of discussions? Don't waste your time on politics with Muslims. When you talk to your Muslim friends, stay away from politics, especially Israel. I know you all like to talk about Israel. Please don't with Muslims. Because once you bring Israel into the equation, you're going to never talk about Jesus Christ. You want to get every discussion back to Jesus Christ. Because where we interject and where we come into contact with Muslims, where we need to be involved in and where we need to make an impact is with Jesus. See, let the politicians take care of the politics. And as you can see, they're doing a lousy job. But that's not the responsibility of the church. Our responsibility as Christians is to bring people to Jesus Christ. We're to bring them into the kingdom. And in order to do that, all you need to do is say two things. This is what I tell everybody to do. You can do it as well. When you meet a Muslim, say up to them and say two things. I believe Jesus is God, and I believe the Bible is the Word of God. Do you have an opinion? It works every time. It works every time. What you're doing is you're saying, you're stamping exactly where you stand. You're saying clearly that you're just not like anybody else here in Britain, because most everybody here in Britain would not say that comment. Even if they call themselves a Christian, they don't believe that Jesus is God. They won't even know what that means. And if they do, they'd be embarrassed by it. But you're not embarrassed by it. And as far as you know, and this is one thing I'm helping you tonight, the one thing that stands in the way with Muslims and us is Jesus Christ. Really, the biggest problem we have with Islam is Jesus. It always comes back to Jesus. It's what they do with Jesus. That's why it does not surprise me that all the earliest inscriptions on the Dome of the Rock, the earliest inscriptions on the coins, Abdul al-Malik, when he introduces Islam, it is actually a religion that confronts the person of Jesus Christ, confronts his divinity, confronts the Trinity, and confronts who he was and what he did and what he said. If you look at how Islam began, it began as a rejection of Jesus Christ. So it doesn't surprise me that almost every conversation you get, as soon as you say you're a Christian, look and see how they respond. Almost immediately they'll start confronting the person of Jesus Christ. How could Jesus be God? How could God have a son? God cannot have a son. How could 1 + 1 + 1 = 1? Referring to the Trinity. How can you believe in the Bible, since the Bible has been corrupted? It's been accreted, it's been deleted, it's been all over the many different books. You don't even know who your authors are. Over and over again, all these accusations against our Bible. Why is it they zero in on those two areas? They always zero in on the person of Jesus, and they always zero in on our scriptures. So begin the discussion with them on those two areas. And you'll spend the next 6 hours talking about Jesus. Now, what would you rather talk about? God bless the Muslims. They always ask the right questions. That's why I love Muslims. I hope you learn to love them. Because they're the only people I know where I can preach the gospel for 4, 5, 6 hours and remain consistent to what I believe. And that's why it's so important that you do start with Jesus. Get him into every conversation. And what you find is Jesus will win every battle for you. He will answer every question for them. Because Jesus is the best man I know. I can't think of a better person to argue with or for. And for the last 30 years, that's all I've been talking about is Jesus and his scriptures. And I can't think of a better battleground. Now, I've opened up a whole horn of questions. We have half an hour. So what I want to do, is it okay if we leave the next half hour just for questions and answers? Okay? So throw questions at me. Any question you want to deal with what we've talked about today, or questions you came with on your mind, and let me see if I can answer them for you so I can scratch where you itch. Any questions you might have. What I'll do, for the camera's sake, I'll repeat the question so the camera gets it. And this way, then, the people who are watching it can also know. I'll start with you and then go to you at the back. Go ahead, start with you. Yes?
Yeah, the two sects of Islam, how did they... You've got the Sunnis and you've got the...
Shiites.
Shiites. What happened there?
Yeah, the Sunnis and the Shiites is not that important. It's basically nothing more than a political problem. The Sunnis believe that the progeny, or the person that is in power, he who controls Islam, must always come from the prophetic line, the line of the prophet. Sorry. The Shiites believe that he who is in power must come from the line of the prophet. The Sunnis believe that he only must come from the ulama, must be a religious scholar. Therefore, when you look at the first 4 caliphs that come after Muhammad, Abu Bakr, who ruled from 632 to 634, the first 2 years after Muhammad's death, he was not from the Prophet's family at all. So he's illegitimate, according to Shiites. The next one that comes on, that moves, and his name is Umar, and he rules from 634 to 644. 10 years. He is also not from the Prophet's line. So he's illegitimate, according to Shiites. And the third one, Uthman, that you refer to, from 644 to 656, the next 12 years. He is not from the Prophet's line. So the first 3 caliphs, none of them were in the Prophet's family. Therefore, all 3 of them were considered to be illegitimate. And that's why the Shiites, who were then disgruntled by this, said that the only person that can be a legitimate ruler must be from the Prophet's family. But here's the problem. Though Muhammad had 12 wives, he could not produce an heir, which says something about his virility. But he could not produce an heir. He did have 2 sons, but they died very young. So none of his sons grew old enough to become his heir. Therefore, he had to do something. So what he did is he took on an adopted son named Ali. And Ali was his adopted son. So Ali then became the legitimate son of Muhammad. And the Shiites believe that Ali, therefore, is the legitimate heir. Ali then was the 4th caliph, who comes after Uthman. Ali only lived from 656 to 661. And then he was killed in 661. So he only ruled for 5 years. His son Hussein then took over, and his son was killed. And we don't know what happened after Hussein. The line then went and disappeared. That doesn't mean it didn't exist, but it went into hiding. Now what Shiites believe is that the line that comes from Hussein is still in hiding today. And that there are going to be 12 imams that come from that line. And the 12th imam, the 12th line, the 12th descendant from Hussein will rise in our lifetime. And that's why Ahmadinejad was going to introduce him. Remember that? He made that big claim that he was going to introduce him, the Iranian president. Well, he's been deposed now, and he still hasn't introduced them. So who knows what's happened to him? That is the difference between Shiism and Sunnism. Sunnism believes anybody could be in the line of could be in power, depending on. And the only thing that is needed is that he must be from the ulama, the religious scholars. Shiites believe he must be the line of prophet from his adopted son. Now that has caused a huge rift because it's a political problem, and that's why today Shiites only make up 10% of all Muslims. And you only find them in Iran, you find them in the southern part of Iraq, the eastern coast of Saudi Arabia, going the other direction. You find them in the southern part of Afghanistan and also of Pakistan. That's the only place you will find Shiites. There are Shiites in many countries, but just small communities. In fact, we have Shiites here in Britain as well, but they all come from one of those 5 countries. Bahrain would be another one that they'd be found. All right, does that answer your question? Okay. Almost all the conflicts that are happening right now in the Middle East are between Sunnis and Shiites. Syria is between the Sunnis and Shiites, because Assad is not a Shiite. He's an Alevi, but he is amalgamated and he is aligned with the Shiites. That's why Iran has come to support him, and that's why Hezbollah from Lebanon have come to support him. And see what the Saudi Arabians want. They want to throw Assad out of there because they want a Sunni to be in power. That's why the Sunnis are almost all controlled, and the Sunnis are almost all ameliorated with Al-Qaeda, and all the rebels are Sunni. So it's a Sunni-Shiite conflict. The same thing in Iraq. The conflict in Iraq is between the Shiite south and the Sunni middle. Then you have the Kurds, the north. But it's the Shiite-Sunni divide that has always been a problem in Iraq. And the Shiites are more numerous. That's why they won the election. The government in Iraq now is Shiite. Okay? First you had a question back there. And the Christians. It's both Jews and Christians. We are both Al-Kitab. Kitab means both books, both the Old and... Because in the Qur'an it says over and over again, the Al-Kitab are the Tawrat and the Injil. The Tawrat are the 4 or 5 books of Moses, and the Injil will be the Gospels. Okay, so it's both the Tawrat and the Injil. We are the one of the Injil. The Muslims are... I'm sorry, the Jews are the ones of the Tawrat or the Torah. Yeah, I have. I don't agree with it. Because he doesn't look at all this extra Quranic material. He's not aware of it because he didn't come and look at those scholars. So that's the only thing. Everything else he says in that book I agree with, except... Well, it's not just in Britain you can find this. The Germans know about this. The Americans know about it. Why doesn't he know about it? He needs to do better work. Okay, any other question? Yeah. The Sufis would be like our charismatics. So the Sufis would be almost in every group. What they are, they believe in mysticism. And so they have other scholars or other leaders that have come after Muhammad who get special revelation, who then write their own books and create their own sects. So Sufism is seen as an aberration by other Muslims. They're not seen as true Muslims. They're still accepted by Muslims, but they're seen as aberrations. And they're seen as people that are kind of a little off the wall because of the fact that they create other revelation that comes after Muhammad. And it's almost borders on heresy for a Sunni or a Shiite. But they don't want to say that they're heretical. Now, there are other groups that are heretical. The Ahmadiyyas would be a heretical group. But the Sufis you will find in almost every culture, especially in African cultures. The reason why is because Sufis basically are nothing more than animistic traditions that have been amalgamated into Islam. And so you have many marabouts. We lived in West Africa for 5 years, my wife and I, in Senegal. And our neighbors were all griots, and they were marabouts in every one of our enclaves. We had marabouts, which are like your witch doctors. They, of course, were witch doctors, and so they had all kinds of incantations and all kinds of things you would, these giddy-giddies that you put on your arms and your waist to ward off all kinds of evil spirits. We had our neighbors who were, we had great neighbors. They were smugglers. That's why they were our neighbors and we were our friends. And they would go and try to get things across the border, and they would put these amulets on with Quranic verses inside, giddy-giddies. And when they see the police come, they'd hike up the giddy-giddies so they'd make them invisible. The only problem is the police also had giddy-giddies that make them visible again. So then they went and bought giddy-giddies to make them impervious to gunshot wounds. So they came, and they were really proud of their new giddy-giddies because they could not be shot by police now because of these giddy-giddies. So I said, okay, I'm going to get a gun here. I'm going to shoot you. Put it in. Let's see if it works. No, please don't try it. So it's this Sufism that has pervaded because it's animistic. What happens, if you take Saudi Arabia as the center of Islam, the further you move away from Saudi Arabia, the more you come into what we call folk Islam. And folk Islam is basically Islam that is based on supernatural events. The reason why is when you look at the Quran, there's nothing supernatural in this book. There's nothing about evil spirits except jinn. But they're very curious little creatures that are made out of fire who spend most of their time up in space trying to get away from asteroids or meteorites because they want to listen to the Quran being read up in heaven. It sounds funny, but actually Muslims, it's in the Quran and they believe it. So what you do then in that case, since you don't have any dealings with, it doesn't give you any protection from evil spirits. Islam doesn't give you any protection against evil spirits. Yet most people that are Muslims come from environments and societies where they are very aware of evil spirits. So what do? You have to basically borrow from what is already there. And that's why when you go into a lot of the Muslim world, if you go into places like Cairo or into even far away into Asia, you will see that they have talismans, they have Fatima's hand, they have the color turquoise, they have the evil eye. These are all folk Islam. These are all Sufi practices that have been brought into Islam to protect them against these evil spirits. They're nothing to do with Islam. And that's why radical Muslims want to burn them and destroy them. And that's where the gospel can come in, because we have protection against evil spirits. The Holy Spirit. And that's why it's a great way when you find the people who are fearful of evil spirits, just introduce them to the Holy Spirit. And that's a great bridge to preach the gospel. Introduce the gospel. At the very back, 2 hands. Let's start on the left, then we'll go on the right. Or on your right and then left. You with the glasses. Good question. Thanks for bringing that up. Is there a briefer reference rather than reading to this big tome of 400 pages? Let me give you a little hint. When you get that book, just read the first 30 pages and then jump to page 300. First 30 pages are very important. From 300 to the end are also very important. So I'm giving you only 130 pages you need to read. But there's also been a documentary that came out in August of 2012 and was shown on Channel 4 called Islam, the Untold Story. Did any of you see it? That was put up in August of last year. If you go up on Channel 4 television, go into their archives, and if you have and watch it. It's only 90 minutes long. It's a condensation of that book into one documentary. Now, when that came out in August of 2012, Dr. Tom Holland was very careful not to say anything that was injurious to Muslims. He was very careful not to put in the documentary much of what he had in his book. In fact, he had a Muslim scholar with him on the documentary, and he kept on asking, what do you think of this? What do you think of this? And wanted his opinion all the way through the documentary. But because it's so explosive, the Muslims got so angered by it that when Channel 4 television tried to show it again last November, so many Muslims wrote in that they didn't show it a second time. So it's only been shown on our televisions once. Now, if any of you have a USB drive with you, I have it on my computer right here. I can give it to you tonight. You can have it. Go home and watch it. And you'll see just how hopeless Islam is historically. Because that in 90 minutes, even though he bends over backwards not to be injurious, it still destroys Islam historically. Does a great job. You can see why the Muslims are angry. Does that help? Okay? Yeah, your question. Then you fill out the picture. Make sure that you fill out the picture then. No, I'm not going to get into a discussion on replacement theology or not, or what has been there, or SAT-7. The reason why SAT-7 covers pretty much every paradigm. It is open to almost any viewpoint. What they try to do, and what they're very careful of, is not to be confrontational. I will say that, and I think they have to, because they are a satellite sending agency that beams into Muslim countries. Much of the material I'm offering you tonight is not for the Muslim world. It is for Britain. This you can use here. Everything I've said tonight you can use here. Because we can be as confrontational as you want. And that's where you can bring in your own proclivities, and certainly bring in and be true to who you stand for. Now, I said very carefully, don't bring Israel into the equation. Not when you're doing evangelism. If the question comes up, then you have all the right to answer it. And that's where you can bring it in. But don't initiate it and don't start with it. The problem is that you will get so much anger immediately that Jesus Christ gets crowded out. And my intention is, and my impression for most missionaries that I've been working with, is you've got to really stick to Jesus Christ. The rest can come later, but keep to Jesus first. Bring him into your conversations. SAT-7 does a great job of doing that. And that's why I appreciate what they're doing. Now, they're also moving into other areas that I'm not so happy with. The insider movement. How many of you are aware of the insider movement? Only one person. Okay. Yeah. There's this whole new movement coming out of America called the insider movement, where missionaries are now going into the Muslim world, and they would rather pay Muslim believers not leave Islam, that there's nothing wrong with Islam, that they can remain inside Islam and still love Jesus as Lord and Savior. The problem with that is numerous. I don't want to get into it tonight, because that's a whole area that we're confronting all over the world, and it's causing huge amount of damage to the church in those countries. Because if you start with the belief that Islam is benign, and that the mosque is a perfectly good place to worship, and that you can do the 5 prayers, and that you can include Muhammad as a prophet, and that you can read the Qur'an, and it's a revelation of God, and that we share the same God, that we share the same Jesus. If you start from that premise, not only are you lying, you're being deceitful. To me, that's deceit. And never, ever should we start with deceit, or have it anywhere in anything we say. We should be true to everything we say. And that's why SAT-7 unfortunately is starting to promote that paradigm. It's a great way to get numerous converts, because every Muslim will say, yes, I believe Jesus is Lord and Savior, as long as I can remain a Muslim. I could do that tomorrow at the speaker's corner, and almost everybody would raise their hand. Because for a Muslim hearing that, they would say, Lord, well, what is a Lord? We have a whole house of lords. Many of them can hardly hear and see. They come tottering into the Lord's chamber just to do on beds sometimes to do a vote. If that's what you mean by Lord, then he's nothing more than someone in authority. And Savior, well, that's the function of every prophet. Every prophet comes to save. So of course Jesus is a Lord and Savior. He's in authority, and he comes to save, but he's not God. That's why, if all you're going to call Jesus Lord and Savior, for a Muslim, you've got to use the right words, and you've got to define Jesus as God. Not as Lord and Savior, but God. On that note, then, of course, then you get into a great discussion, and that's why I think SAT-7 has gone by. But if you have a problem with what SAT-7 is doing, then you fill in the rest. Get on board. Make sure your voice gets out there. But make sure always start with Jesus. That's all that I ask. Okay? Yeah, hand over here. Now, this is the question he's brought up is it's fascinating because in the last 20 to 30 years, they've done studies of converts from Islam to Christianity, and 75% of all converts talk about visions and dreams. That they've had a dream of Jesus or a vision of Jesus. And I get excited by it. That's my answer. I love it. I think it's great because Jesus and God is doing our work for us. And almost all the converts I know, even the ones that I brought to Christ, have started out with one of those dreams or visions. Invariably, that comes up in their conversation. Oh yeah, I remember Jesus. He was in my dream. They would call him Issa. And they said, he came to me at nighttime, dressed in white. Or he came and he was all aglow. And he came and said, you must follow me. Don't persecute me. These kind of stories. We're hearing them everywhere, in almost every culture. It seems to be universal. So I get excited. I don't reject it at all. What I will say is this. I have never seen a Muslim brought... I should have to be careful. I don't want to say that. I myself personally have never seen a Muslim brought to the gospel or to the kingdom through just dreams and visions. That usually initiates their curiosity. That's where we need to come in. And I think God is doing that for a purpose, to bring them onto our doorsteps, to get the interest there, to get them started, but then we've got to bring them through and bring them all the way into the kingdom and introduce them to Jesus Christ as God, as one of three. Not just any God, but part of the Trinity. And that's why it's important that we need to be there and stand in the gap. And also then to bring them home to the real gospel, bring them home to the real God, bring them home to the real Jesus, not Issa, but Jesus, or Yeshua in Arabic. Okay, does that help? So don't dispute the dreams, but don't leave them there. Bring them the rest of the way home. Okay? Any other questions? Yeah.
I think it's in the Qur'an, but I'm not too sure. But I've heard it said that actually we're all Muslims, but we don't know it.
Yeah. Muslims will tell you this. What they say is that everybody is born a Muslim, but because of our environment, because of our family, because of our culture, we then become apostates. So all of us sitting in this room are apostates. That we have apostatized. Which if so, then they should kill all of us. Because the law for apostasy is capital punishment. Now what they will say is, yes, but when you convert back to Islam, you don't become a convert, you become a revert. So they call anybody who then becomes a Muslim in this country a revert. They've reverted back to the original state. And they say it's because of our environment, because of our families, because of the teachings in our school that we get pulled away from Islam. But we were all born Muslims. Everybody on earth is born a Muslim. And that's why they want to bring us back to Islam. Yeah. The true religion, the only religion, the true faith, the only prophet, the true prophet, the great prophet, the seal of all prophets. Yeah. Okay? Yeah.
You reply that Jesus is God, Jesus came into earth as God.
Oh, I'm very clear about that. And so must you be very clear about that. Don't apologize for it. Jesus is God, yes, and he did come to earth as God. And even I don't think we need to be at all fearful of saying that. Please don't be fearful of saying that. Be confident. I tell you the reason why is every Muslim I know looks for passionate Christians, and they can't find it here in Britain. They find most Christians in Britain are timid. When I ask my Muslim friends, what's your impression of Christians? They say they're timid, they're shy, they don't know what they believe, and what little they know they cannot defend. That's a huge indictment against us, because that's the way we come across. We're so fearful of hurting their sensibilities. When every Muslim I know loves to talk about Muhammad and loves to deride and confront Jesus Christ, they step all over my sensibilities. And I don't mind it, because for me that gives me the introduction, in fact the invitation then to defend him. They've given me a platform to defend my own Lord. So I think we need to be just as passionate as them. Not as aggressive as them. Please, that's not what I mean. Passionate. Be confident in what you say. And say it passionately. Because that will make much more of an impact for a Muslim than if you say timidly or shy or reservedly. That's one area where you need to get out of your British reserve and become passionate. Maybe become more like them. They can teach us something. Yeah. Okay. Now, I'm going to do two things with that question, because there's two things that have happened because of that question concerning, are you familiar with what has happened with our translations, our biblical translations into Muslim languages? Do you all know who Wycliffe is in SIL? Have you heard of this controversy at all? Okay. For those of you who haven't, let me just bring you up to speed, because it all has to do with this question that you brought up, and that's the Son of God. The question is, should we worry about the word Son of God, the phrase Son of God? Because Son of God, when a Muslim hears it, it's a biological term. It's a sexual term. That means God had sex with a woman called Mary. Since God had sex with Mary, and then from their progeny came Jesus, that's a sexual connotation, and that's why they get so offended. It's offensive to Muslims, which is true, and I would agree. That's true. That's what comes across to a Muslim when he hears that Jesus is Son of God. In English, Son of God means just that, doesn't it? It means the same thing in English. In every language, Son of God means that there is a progeny that has come from God. So you can see it's not just a problem for Muslims, it also should be a problem for you. But it isn't, is it? So how do you define Son of God if he's not from Mary? But doesn't that mean biological? Begotten, not made. So what does begotten mean? Okay, where are you from? From where? Are you a son of Ireland? Oh dear. Where are you from? Where are you from? From England. Are you a son of England? Where is my patriotism today? Is there anybody that's patriotic for England? Where are you from? Please say you're a son of England. Is no one... I can't find one patriot in this whole room. Are you a son of England? I am. Okay, are you proud of it? Yes. Good on you. I finally find a patriot. Does that mean that you were born from the ground of England? Does that mean you have you were born from the ground of England? No. Does your mother have some relationship with England? No. No. So how can you be the son of England? It's your citizenship. So that means you inherit everything that England gives you. And so when you get a passport, that passport gives you all the rights of an English citizenship. That's what son of England means. Or son of, you're not sure where you're from, and you're not sure where you're from, and you're embarrassed for being coming from Ireland. But those who actually love where they're from say it all the time. I'm a son of so-and-so. And ask any Muslim this. Are you the son of Baghdad? Are you the son of Iraq? Yes, I'm a son of Iraq. Does that mean you have a biological... No. So they understand it. They get it. And that's what the Bible is saying. Every time Jesus is called Son of God, every one of you in this room knows that there's nothing biological about that. It's relational. It's begotten, not made. It's a relational title. And that relational title has been there from the very beginning. In fact, before the beginning. Jesus has always been the Son of God. Eternally been the Son of God. Will always be the Son of God. That relationship will never cease to exist. That's why Jesus chose it. That's why he used it. That's why over and over again, Jesus referred to himself as Son of God. It's one of the most important titles, and that's why Caiaphas, there in the Sanhedrin, when he was trying Jesus in Matthew 26, when he says to Jesus, "Are you the Son of God?" He asked him that quickly. He asked him that specifically because every Jew knew who the Son of God was, not a Son of God, like you're all sons of God, but only one could be called the Son of God. Definite article. And that's why when Jesus said, "Yes, I am," look and see what Caiaphas did. He tore his robe in anger, saying, "This man has blasphemed." Because every Jew knew that the Son of God inherits everything that God the Father inherits. That means he inherits everything that the Father inherits. That means that he is God. That's a divine term. That's a divine title. It's one of the three major divine titles that we see in the New Testament. Son of God, Messiah, and Son of Man. Those are the three divine titles, and then Yahweh would be the fourth. And that's why it's so important that we don't take it out of our Bibles. Now, what Wycliffe wants to do is they want to take out Son of God. They want to take out any reference to God the Father in all of our Muslim translations because they think that it's injurious to Muslims to hear it, like it's injurious to you to hear it. Without realizing, if you take out Son of God, what are you going to replace it with? What would you like to replace it with? Do you have a replacement for it? Why is it Jesus chose Son of God and not any other title? And look and see why Caiaphas gets so angry. Because that exactly defines who he is. It defines him as God. It's the best way to say he is God. But more than that, it also defines what a son is to a father. Because the Son obeys the Father. The Father sends and the Son goes. All the way through Scripture, the Son obeys the Father, and it's a beautiful idea of what relationship is between Father and Son. That's how we know families exist. We get it from the Godhead itself, from the Trinitarian Godhead. But it all talks about relationship. And if you have any difficulty with knowing where relationship comes, where do you think a relationship originates? It originates in the Trinitarian formula, in the Trinitarian Godhead. Relationship has always been there, eternally has been there. That's why we're relational animals, because we're made in God's image. And that's why I love the Trinity, because the Trinity suddenly helps me to understand why I love all of you and why you love me. Why is it that we have relationship? Why is it that we will always have relationship? And why is it that this could have only come from a relational Father, a relational God? See, Islam has a problem here, because Islam believes God is one, right? A monad. And has never had any other. God has no partners, Surah 5, Ayah 72. God has no son, Surah 4, Ayah 171. God has no wife, Surah 6, Ayah 101. God does not eat, Surah 5, Ayah 75. God does not share his glory with another, Surah 5, Ayah 116. Every one of these references is against the idea of God being relational. So I ask my Muslim friends this: if God is not relational, then what are you going to do with his 99 names? Because the three most important names of those 99 names are Al-Rahman, Al-Rahim, Al-Wadud, the compassionate one, the merciful one, the loving one. Mercy, compassion, and love require an object, do they not? You have to be merciful to someone. You have to be compassionate to someone. You have to be loving to someone. If those are his eternal names, then who was Allah relational to? Who was he loving to before Adam and Eve were created? Ooh, I love that question. In order for him to even have those names, he has to be a relational God. Where does relationship come with if God is only one? That I can only find in the Trinitarian formula. For Muslims to even understand those words, they have to come back to us, to our Bible, to the Trinity, to our God. Bring him home. Therefore, God must remain the Son of God. Jesus is the Son of God, has always been the Son of God. Do not take it out of our Scripture, because I can't argue this anymore. And what am I going to do if you replace it with something else? And look what Wycliffe wants to replace it with. Representative of God. Representative? Is that equivalent to Son of God? Do you see Caiaphas asking, are you the representative of God? Jesus would say, well, we're all representatives of God. I'm a representative, aren't you? We're all representatives of God. Muhammad is one of his famous titles is representative of God. And by taking Son of God out and replacing it with representative, you're taking his divine name out and reducing him to nothing more than a prophet. You've taken away his divinity. And who do you think is going to love that? Every Muslim is going to be applauding us. And they will probably pay for those translations. Because for 1,400 years, Muslims have asked us to get rid of Son of God. Because they know more than anybody else that if you call him Son of God, he is saying, I am God. He is calling himself God. So keep it in. Yes, it's going to offend. But it's going to offend them for the right reason. It's going to offend them because Jesus is saying, when I am Son of God, I am God. That's highly offensive for any Muslim. How could a man, a prophet, be God? That's exactly what we're saying. I hope everybody in this room believes that. Please do, and never apologize for that. That's why I love the Bible. It's all consistent. And from the very beginning, it's right there. From the very first chapter, God refers to himself in the plural sense. He says, let us create man in our image, in verse 26 and 27. And then look at what it says in the very next part of the verse. In his image, singular. So he refers to himself in the plural, but then he acts in a singular. In fact, look at the very first verse. Elohim, gods, is actually plural. And I'm sure you all know this. Elohim is not singular. That'd be Eloi. It's not dual. That'd be Eloha. The fact that it's Elohim means it has to be three or more. In the very first verse of the Bible, God is referred to in the plural sense. And look at the verb that follows it. Bara. That's singular. So in the beginning, gods, but there he does create singularly. Ooh, I love it. And that's why all through the Bible you'll find the Trinitarian formula, chapter after chapter after chapter. We have a whole paper written on this. If any of you want to see it, come and see me afterwards. We'll show you where the Trinity is all the way through. And the Son of God is one of the best names I know. And that's why we must leave it in there. And that's why I do not at all apologize for Jesus being called the Son of God. And I'm the first one to say so. And I hope you all say so as well. Stay close to Scripture and use the words God used. There's a reason why he used those words. And I think because today he knew that this is going to be a conflict with Muslims. But let's bring him home. Any other question? Yeah.
How widespread is the Shiite regime's belief that Mahdi is coming to a world where there'll be global conflict? Jesus says his lieutenant will conquer the world for Islam, they'll kill the Antichrist at Jerusalem. How widespread is that kind of
Well, if the question is how wide is the Shiism belief in the Mahdi coming, only 10% of Muslims believe in that. But all Muslims believe that Jesus is coming again. Even the Sunnis believe. And they believe that when he comes in the future, that he'll live for 47 years, he will destroy all the pigs and destroy all the crosses, marry a woman, have 7 children, then he'll die, and then he'll rise to heaven. So they have lots of specifics, but this all comes from other traditions, much, much later. Now, I don't have a problem with that, but I don't believe he's going to destroy any pigs, and I'm sure he's not going to destroy crosses. What would be the reason? We know what's going to happen when he comes again. So this is just fairy tale. It's nothing more than that. Yeah. Okay, yeah.
How would you distinguish, you talked earlier about liberal Muslims and
Okay.
Muslims and radical Muslims.
The question is, how do we distinguish the different kinds of Muslims? And really there are 3 kinds of Muslims here in Britain. You have the radical Muslims over here on the right. You have the nominal Muslims in the middle, and you have the liberals on the left. And those are the 3 definitions they gave to themselves after 9/11. After 9/11, they did a survey all over Britain to see how many people supported Osama bin Laden, how many people supported Al-Qaeda. And from their own research, they found that 15% supported Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden, over here on the right. 15%, so a very small minority. The vast majority of Muslims were in the middle, nominal. And they didn't understand who these radicals were. They didn't know what their agenda was, and they were actually quite concerned by what they were hearing over here. And the last 15% were liberal. Now let's define what they mean by that. They themselves, Muslims, say that a radical Muslim is a Muslim that follows this book. That follows this book as a divine edict. So everything this book says, they must do. But as I said earlier, there's not much in this book that they can follow. It doesn't make much sense. 20% of it, even the Muslim scholars don't understand. So they've got to go to the traditions which give the model of this book, the traditions which model it on the person of Muhammad. That's what they follow. So a radical Muslim follows this book and follows the Muhammad's model. The nominals in the middle, they would know about that, but they don't understand the Quran. They've probably not read it. They've only memorized parts of it. Most of them have come to this country to get a job and to get an education, so they're not really interested in what the radicals are doing. But they're curious, and they're rather threatened by the radicals. And then the liberals on this side, they tend to be the academic Muslims. They've come here to get away from Islam. They don't want anything to do with Islam. They've read this book, and they don't like it. And that's why many of them have come to this country. Most of them are in our academic institutions. They are the ones that are professors. They're very highly academic, highly intellectual. And they are the ones that are trying to reduce Islam into a Western paradigm. They are the ones that are telling you that Islam is a religion of peace. They are the ones that are telling you that Muhammad is a man of peace. They are the ones that are telling you that the Quran is a book of peace. Now, everybody in this country wants to hear that, especially your politicians. David Cameron wants to hear that. Tony Blair before him. Tony Blair, I remember him saying many times, I've read the Quran 3 times through, and all I see is peace and tolerance. I would love to know what Quran he was reading. Because when I get in debates with Muslims, the first question I ask them is, show me one peaceful verse here. One peaceful verse that says you must not hurt me or you must not kill me. Show me one. And in 30 years of asking that question, I have yet to see a Muslim that could find one. It just doesn't exist. Oh, there's peaceful verses about other Muslims, but there's not one peaceful verse about me as a Christian or a Jew. It says just the opposite. Make war upon the Jews, the people of the book, Surah 9, Ayah 29. Slay the unbeliever wherever ye find them. Besiege them. Lay in wait with them for every kind of ambush. That's Surah 9, Ayah 5. Cut off the heads of the unbelievers. Surah 47, Ayah 4. Slay the unbeliever until there is no more fitna in the land. Surah 8, Ayah 39. And I could go to 149 of these verses. I won't waste your time. Nonetheless, they wanted to find out where they stood. In 2001, when they made this survey, 15% were radical, 70% were nominal, and the last 15% were liberal. Defined like I just defined them. Follow the book, unsure of what to do, have nothing to do with the book. A A year later, in 2002, they did another survey, asked the same questions, and this group that had been 15% had grown to 25%. That was by 2002. All taken from the middle group. Didn't touch the liberals. In 2006 was the last time they did a survey. That's 6 years ago. 7 years now. This group, by 2006, had grown to 43%. Almost half of all Muslims have now become radicalized in this country, here in Britain. All taken from the middle. Still 15% over here. Why do you think in 5 years they had gone from 15% up to 43%? Why do you think? See, this is what most people say, Iraq and Afghanistan. But when I deal with radicals, I spend all my time with radicals. I'm speaking to them every day. They never talk about Iraq and Afghanistan. They will talk about Iraq and Afghanistan for your sake. Because they know they'll run and run and run, make you feel guilty. And listen, British people are lovely. It's almost an industry here, feeling guilty. You're guilty for everything. You feel guilty for the colonial experience. You feel guilty for, listen, just for your language. We should know, we're American. Now, can you see the problem? For Muslims, for them over here, the radicals, they don't care really dilly swat about Iraq and Afghanistan. They just see that as problematic of what's greater. If you talk to a radical Muslims, they hate everything about your culture. The fact that you drink. The fact that your women don't cover. The fact that you allow women to be here in a room with men. The fact that you educate women and men equally. The fact that women are in the workplace. The fact that you don't have any religion anymore. That only 5% of your people go to church. They get excited when they see an evangelical Christian because at least they find somebody that's like them. The radicals have the same problems that we have with Britain. Don't we have the same, except women dressing up, and we don't have the same moral code as them, but we also don't like what Britain's become. The one-parent families everywhere. The undiscipline of the children. The enormous amount of gambling and all this pornography that's everywhere on the internet and almost on every newspaper, page 3 girls. All this is what they're complaining about. And when I talk to them, this is what they complain about. It's the immorality they don't like. It's the fact that you have usury here, interest. It's the fact that you have a democratic state here. The whole democratic principle is what they hate. And it's the fact that you are not following God's principles. That everything you're following is man-made principles. That's what the radicals are upset about. That's why, if you look and see, where have the radicals ever been in control? Have you noticed, what one place has the radicals been in control in your lifetime? Give me an example. That's one example. And what do they do in Saudi Arabia? What do they do with women? They keep them away. They're not permitted to be in public. They can't even drive. They cannot vote. They keep women in the homes. But what's the country that's probably the closest example we have to radicalism? Afghanistan. The Taliban. Remember the Taliban? Take a look and see what the Taliban did when they came into power. What is the first thing they did? They destroyed all the videos. Remember that? They took them and they put them up on the trees. They destroyed all literature. They destroyed those 2 big statues. They got rid of all idolatry. They got everything. They basically wanted to take Afghanistan back to the 7th century. And that's what the radicals want to do. They want to take the whole world and bring it back to a 7th century model, back to the Prophet's model. That's why you need to be careful, because in order to understand that, you can ask, where is it they're getting this from? Are they making it up? Is it something that they love? Is it something that they've thought up? All of this comes straight out of the text. It comes right out of this book and the traditions. That's why your government has no idea how to deal with radicals. They have no idea what motivates them. What motivates them is this book, folks. What motivates them is the ideology that this book engenders. It's the ideology of Islam that is claiming and is forcing Muslims to do what they do, say what they say, dress the way they dress, and treat the women the way they treat the women. That's why those 2 young boys wanted to grow a beard. That's why that school in Derby had to be shut down, because they even made the teachers wear hijabs. The non-believing teachers wear hijabs. That's why you'll find this raise its head everywhere. It's not because they love the fact that women wear hijabs. It's because it's in the Qur'an in Surah 33, Ayah 59. Cover up your women's completely. It says so right there in Surah 33, Ayah 59. It's in the book. All of this comes out of the book. Men Control your women. And to those women who disobey their husbands, admonish them first. If that doesn't work, throw them from the bed. If that doesn't work, beat them. Daraba in Arabic. That's right. Like a donkey. That's in Surah 4, Ayah 34. Straight out of the Quran. And to those who thieve, cut off the hands of the thieves. Surah 5, Ayah 38. And to the adulterers, whip them 100 lashes. Surah 24, Ayah 2. I could go on and on and on and on. It comes straight out of the book. And that's what the radicals want. They want to take us back to this book. Now stop and think. We want to take everybody back to this book, don't we? To the New Testament, don't we? We can understand this better than anybody else. We're the best equipped to understand Muslims. We understand the power of Scripture. I understand why Muslims get so excited, why they want to bring us, they take us back to this book. And that's why I spend all my time attacking this book. I don't hate the Muslims. I love the Muslims. It's what this book does to them that bothers me. It's what this book does to women. Surah 4, Ayah 3. A man can have up to 4 wives. Surah 4, Ayah 11. A woman can only have half the inheritance of a man. Surah 4, Ayah 24. A man can have as many concubines above and beyond the 4 wives as his right hand possesseth. Surah 4, Ayah 34. A man can beat his wife. Surah 2, Ayah 282. That a woman only gets half the testimony in court of a man. Surah 2, Ayah 223. That a woman is a tilth for her husband and a man may plow her sexually anytime he wants. Ooh, I hate that verse. Surah 2, Ayah 230. That a man simply has to say, I divorce you 3 times to get rid of his wife. And if the next morning he wakes up and he wants to take his wife back, she has to marry another man. He has to consummate that marriage and divorce her before the man can take her back again. That's in Surah 2, Ayah 230. Which is just what you do with horses. It treats women like horses. And that's why I attack and I confront this book. Don't hate the Muslims. It's this book you must confront. When we've got the better book, bring him back to this book. Bring him back to Jesus. It's the person Muhammad that you must confront. Bring him back to Jesus. In every case, we win. Okay? Hope that helps. Yeah.
Why don't the feminist movement, why don't they speak against the Muslims?
How many believe, what would happen to feminists if they did speak against Muslims? Why do not homosexuals speak against Muslims? Why doesn't Stonewall confront the Muslims with Surah 24, Ayah 2? Everybody's scared of Muslims. Because Muslims are the only people that will kill you for what you say. Right? Do you know of any other religion that will kill you for what you say? Do you know of any other religion, if you leave it, you're given 3 days to repent, and after 3 days, if you don't repent, you get executed by either your father or your oldest brother? That's in the Quran. That's in Surah 4, Ayah 89. Now, how many people in Britain can repeat what I've just said tonight? How many people in Britain even know these references? How many of you have ever heard these references before? And why aren't they teaching this material to all of you? Why is it there's not one Bible school, not one seminary in the world that teaches what I've told you tonight? Not even our church wants to hear this. Not even our church wants to take on Muslims. No one wants to take on Muslims because they're scared to death of Muslims.
I tried talking a few years ago, Bishop of Southampton, and a lot of Turkish people invited us along for Muhammad's birthday. We had a Catholic priest, and I just read a lot of stuff in the Quran and Hadith, and they actually did ask me what I thought. And I said, the Bishop spoke, the Catholic priest said, he quoted the verse, those who believe in the day of resurrection, Christians, Jews, Sabians, will all be okay. So we've got a lot in common, and I find we can just pray together and it goes well. But anyway, I said, I've just been reading things in the Quran and Hadith about the Prophet and his treatment of women and his incitement to violence, and very shocking. And the Bishop walked out. I was on my own with about 90 Muslims. And all the representative Christians, there weren't many, they all left. They didn't want to go down that road.
Don't you love that? But here's a problem. It is a problem in the church. We don't have any seminary, any Bible school that will teach what I just taught tonight. Because what I taught you tonight is called polemics. There's not one school in the world that will teach polemics. They will teach apologetics. Apologetics is taught, but not Muslim apologetics. There are only 2 schools I know in the world that teach Islamic apologetics, and they're both in America, not in this country. There's not one seminary or Bible school that we even teach anything about Islam other than that Islam is benign, that we must dialogue with Muslims, come alongside them, find commonality with them, find common ground with Islam. It's called the grace method in this country. Everybody wants the grace method because nobody wants to confront the person of Muhammad, the Qur'an, or their God. Those are the three taboos in this country. And that's why pretty much Muslims can do what they want here. And the only ones that are trying to confront them are your government, who are absolutely incapable of confronting because they don't even understand the Quran. They've never read the Quran. They don't even know what motivates Muslims to do what they're doing. We're the only ones that understand this book. We're the only ones that understand the power of this book because we understand the ideology. We're reading the verses. And that's why we're saying, folks, wake up. This book is doing the damage. We've got to confront this book. And that's why this whole historical critique that I introduced, and that's why I started out with it this evening. I started out with showing you that basically we can destroy the Quran now. But did you notice, when I was talking about the manuscripts and I sent those pictures around, did you notice that I could have been anybody saying that? That was not a Christian critique that I gave. That's why I gave it. Did you notice when I gave that critique of those manuscripts, everything I was quoting and everything I said about Atar-Kulich, about the 2,270 manuscript variants that are in those manuscripts, everything I quoted were from Muslim sources. They were from Muslim sources. This is not a Christian polemic. This is not even a Western polemic. This is a Muslim polemic. And it's the Muslims that have finally realized that there is no Quran at all from the 7th century. And if there's no Quran from the 7th century, that means Muhammad had nothing to do with it. And we are destroying Muhammad and the Quran in one fell swoop. Ooh, I love it. Folks, we got to be the first one to introduce it and get it into the public sphere. Because I hope and I really wish, I would like to see Islam destroyed in my lifetime. And I say it on radio, I say this on TV, I say it to all my Muslim friends. Because I am sick and tired of what Islam is doing to women, what it does to men, what it does to children, what it does to people who are under its control. Just look and see, every Muslim country on earth is in conflict. Huntington's thesis that came out in 1996, when he said that every Muslim country, if you look, in 1996, he looked at the 20 conflicts that were happening around the world. And all of the 20 conflicts, 18 of them involved Islamic nations. And he coined the term that Islam has bloody borders. What he meant by that is that every Muslim country is in conflict with its neighbor or in conflict with itself. And I'll tell you why. It's because of this book. Because this book is full of violence. Folks, we've got to stop Islam. It's growing faster than any other religion. It is now, right now, the second largest religion on earth. In 7 years, it will be the largest religion on earth. In 7 years, in 2020, it will surpass Christianity, both Protestants and Catholics put together. Are you ready for that? We can no longer walk away from it. It's not a religion that's over there like we always thought. It's now amongst us. I live in London, and there are 1 million Muslims living in London. A city of 10 million, Greater London has 14 million, but in the 10 million where all the Muslims live, they make up 10% of our population. We have them all around us. I don't know why every one of you don't get involved with Muslims, because you're the only ones that can understand them. You're the only ones that really can confront them. You're the only ones that can bring them from this book back to this book. Bring them home. Bring them home, my favorite phrase. Bring them back to Jesus Christ. And on that note, I'll give it back to you, Mike. Thank you very much.